Hey guys,
Welcome to Rooted in Time Genealogy with your host, Nicole.
and Melody.
We're two sisters starting a podcast that brings together genealogy and history with a smattering of some generational drama and trauma. All right, Mel, what is this podcast?
You tell me. This was your idea.
Do we
You're the
even know?
history and genealogy person.
All right, so first, let's go ahead and kind of define some of the terms that you're going to hear in our podcast over and over again, as you know, every word has multiple definitions. So, first, I'm going to define genealogy, and I'm going to define it very easily. It's pretty much the tracing of one's ancestry. So, you might be looking at vital records, you could be looking at DNA, you could be listening to oral traditions from the elders of your family. All of those sorts of aspects of life can come together to form a genealogy.
So remind me again, how far have you gotten in our family's genealogy?
Oh gosh. Certain lines, and this is lines that I have, fully documented lines with proofs and whatnot to about the 1500s, which is
See,
rare.
that's crazy.
It's
That's
rare.
crazy.
It's rare,
But I
but
mean, you've been working on that for literally years.
20
too.
years at
Yeah,
least.
so
At least 20 years. Yes.
makes it easy for any of us if we ever have a project. I know Alex, who's my daughter, she's 7. Whenever she gets to the point where she has to do genealogy stuff for school, she's gold.
Yep. Call me. I'll give you more than you need.
You'll have all the things.
So that's the genealogy part of this podcast. The history part, I use history in a, I guess, more liberal definition of history, in that it is based upon a written document, but it can also go into the social constructs of a society, whether that's the laws or how a society is built with legislation, how a local population might survive. I also take it into like an economic realm and just all these different sorts of pieces of the world. When you're looking at genealogy and you're looking at history, you're essentially looking at a microcosm of the world. It's one person's place in this larger world, and you want to be able to understand the context of that person within the context of their world. So that's why I look at history as more of just looking at the written word, but also putting that written word in context.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into what the generational trauma is too. You know, if you look at families throughout history, a lot of times the historical place that they're in society at that time can trigger some traumas within that family that's carried down from generation to generation. Sometimes it can be maybe their family was heavily exposed to poverty, wars, whatever it may be. And so that family created basically these um, ways to handle that. And sometimes they weren't healthy ways. And so they carried that from one generation into another, which is why you see a lot of traumas and stuff in families and why it ties from each generation to generation. So that's one thing that we'll definitely be looking at. I know as we get into even like our own personal family history and how like we came from
Generational trauma is there.
yes, drama is there.
We are okay. I mean, and you know what's interesting about, trauma and generational trauma and that
Mhm.
sort of aspect of genealogy, you very rarely hear genealogists talk about the bad.
Well, and it's funny because coming from my background of being a part of psychology and having a degree in psychology and, a master's and stuff in it, we looked at like family therapy whenever we were studying that. One of the things that we had to do is a genealogy, and we had to go back and look at, okay, well, what kind of behaviors did we see? What type of if there is anything that was dysfunctional. And it's cool with this that we're able to tie that into the historical climates that could have impacted the reason for those behaviors and for those different mental illnesses and things like that you might see. So it is very cool to kind of tie into these three elements, all of those kind of into a nice, like, oh, a different way of looking at it, I guess.
And our backgrounds being what they are is going to help tremendously, I believe, in kind of getting a well-rounded view of a lot of these genealogies that we're going to discuss and talk about on here. My background, I have a master's in history. My undergrad was in history and criminal justice. I have been doing genealogy as a hobbyist for about 20 years, and I'm currently transitioning into more of a professional role for genealogy and starting to do more genealogy in that respect. But one of the things I saw kind of missing is this genealogy and ancestry and understanding it in context. You do see that on some of like the shows and things that you go into, but the trauma aspect a lot of times is pushed to the side. I've been at conferences where I have asked questions like, well, if we know something is traumatic and we want to write about it, ethically, what can we write? What can we do? And I've never fully gotten an answer from somebody because nobody wants to touch that. But the thing is, when you look at society and you're trying to understand why you might be the way you are, or why your family member is this way or that, that's something that's very important. And if you can learn and understand it, then there is a possible path forward to kind of change to a more positive pattern.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it kind of reminds me of like growing up, we would hear our mom always use the phrase not generational trauma, but generational curse.
Yes.
Because that's what it felt like.
Yes.
But without understanding it, it's hard to combat it. So I do think it's very cool to be able to see it in a different way. And I mean, I've been kind of along for the ride listening to you talk about, oh, I discovered this about our family recently, which we won't get into, will probably be a different time. But it was funny. She had found a newspaper article about this guy. And I can't remember what time it was, when it was. But
I think it was
decades and decades ago.
Yeah, it was definitely older. I can't remember off the top of my head. What I want to say is like in the 19-teens, 1920s. It was old.
Yeah, and it was hilarious because she sent it to me and she was just like, look, we finally found like a good male role model in our family. And I was like, I'm not reading it that way. What did he do?
Yes, we had two completely different interpretations of how that article made that person look like.
Yeah. And so stay tuned for that story because
it'll be coming.
It'll be coming. But it was an interesting and kind of eye-opening experience about how, like, okay, well, historically, we don't really have that many good male role models in our family in the past.
Which you're going to see that bias whenever we talk about things that's going to come out. It's not saying that we had great female role models either, but it definitively in our family history, there have not been very many male positive figures.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Fortunately, I feel like we both got really good male role models in our husbands that we currently have and everything like that. So
yes,
luckily we're able to again go back and see these cycles and see what the history is for our family and be able to kind of know what we didn't want.
Yeah,
for
and
our own.
Not make the comment of, well, it could be worse. Instead, we were able to finally make the comment of, well, it could be better.
Mm-hmm.
Which was
and
very
what can
important.
we do what steps can we take to make that happen? So that's kind of what our background is. I know I've witnessed Nicole go through this genealogy thing, and I've never been one to love history. Like, I know for me, I was telling Nicole, like, whenever I was seeing some of these things, I'm like, there's so many names, there's so many different people, who's where, what, how. So we will be with these podcasts, we will go ahead and she's going to actually create kind of a tree. So people will have a visual. Because
yes.
I'm a visual person.
I will be uploading not only like the different relationships so that you can follow along better if you're somewhere where you're actually able to see the web space, but I'm also going to upload some of the documents because maybe you're interested in seeing what a census from 1860 might look like or something of that matter. So it'll be educational in that way. Now, I'm really excited actually about the first topic that we are going to discuss. This is one that got me interested in genealogy and then got me into going, well, why? Why was that story brought up? So a lot of us, especially those of us that have been told we're like brought up through maybe an Irish Native American background through the Appalachian area of the world, which is where my maternal side of the family was from and had very deep roots in that area. We were told growing up that we were Irish and Native American and that we were descended from a Cherokee princess.
Yep.
Is that what you were told?
I was. I remember that story, and it's just like, I remember being very young when I heard that. I don't even remember who I heard it from. It was just something that was like in the family, and
I heard it from Grandma Helen.
Oh, okay. See, I don't even remember. I just remember it was out there. It was one of those things like, oh, the family. And now as an adult, I'm looking at it, I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know how credible that is.
But for years, I mean, people would ask, what are you? I'm Irish Native American.
Yeah.
Like, no hesitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
To give you an idea, according to this, our 2 times, so our great-great-grandmother was supposedly 100% Cherokee princess, and then her daughter, then, who would be our great-grandmother, was supposed to be, about, I don't think her husband was ever said to be Cherokee, so I was thinking she was supposed to be like 50%. That's how I always perceived it. It might have been different. And then her husband was where you got the Irish. So her husband was supposedly 100% Irish, which that's an entirely different story to get into. But in this instance, this is something that was very much told to people in the early 1900s in this area, and people just took it for granted. We're going to discuss, some ways that a person can find out if this is truly their heritage by going through what I went through to figure this out, but also going through the history of it.
Yeah, and what's funny is whenever you first talked to me about this topic, it was just like, okay, and then I just did a simple Google search, and it's like the myth of being told that you had a Cherokee princess.
Yep.
So it is something that many families have that story within their family. So it's not something that's unheard of by any means. A simple Google search, I was like, oh, this is more, I guess, common than I really thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool because, like, growing up, we didn't have this, like, ancestry, like, or the DNA type stuff that, like, literally breaks down, like, your ancestry and everything. So it's like, yeah, and I know you and Mom had that done. So do you want to tell them kind of what the breakdown is actually for?
So I'm going to be talking about that in the first podcast. I will actually give you, I'm going to put an image up, and it's going to show both mine and my mother's genetics. And I'll explain both, what this means as far as DNA and also the shortcomings that come with DNA when it comes to genetics, because you're not getting 100% of the genes of your parents. So there are ways that things could be, traits and places could be washed out or minimized. But in this case, I will say the percent of Native American was 0.
Yeah.
So the likelihood of us having any Native American blood, at least that close to us genetically, is slim. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I'm sitting here looking at it right now, and I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So those estimates, I mean, yeah, expect certain other areas to flag, even if Native American didn't flag. But based upon what ethnicities are currently being flagged by Ancestry.com on our DNA, it's a no-go for having Native American genetic blood. Now, the next question was what I really needed to look into, though, was, well, was there a community or any kinship? And we'll get into that, because not everyone that said they were Native American would necessarily blood test for that if they came in as an adopted person or something of that nature, which did happen. So, and that's going to be the other tools to try to figure out, why your family might have said something like this.
Yeah. And why do you think that this was such a myth that came on, if you were to look at the history side of it? Like,
so in our family, I believe somewhere down the line that somebody may have had darker skin, and instead of stating the specifics of where that heritage might have come from, they went straight to saying Native American. And that's just a guess. There are so many other things, and we'll discuss those in the podcast to come about this. But yeah, there are so many different variables that different families and different people could have come up with. I mean, some might have just wanted to get the land. And we'll talk about, the Dawes rolls and being able to be considered part of the tribe and the land you would then get and those sorts of things, and why people might try to do it that way for gain. But yeah, there are a lot of different reasons that people would have, wanted to say Native American instead of something else, or they just wanted to feel like they're more part of the United States indigenously. Like they felt a kinship with the land.
Okay.
So, yep.
Interesting.
All right. Well, I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what our podcast will be about. I'm going to have documents up prior to the podcast launching, and I'll make sure that it launches and let you know from my website at rootedintimegen.net. So if you're interested in going there and taking a perusal around the website, it's there for you. I also do have resources and things like that for you in your pursuit of genealogy as well.
Sounds fun.
I'm excited.
I'm very excited about it.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. And what's kind of cool also about it is, like, me and Nicole, growing up, we did not get along. But now it's like she's my go-to person to talk to. Like, I don't know. I might call her 2-3 times a day.
She got smart. She got smart and realized I was just great.
But what's cool is, like, we complement each other in a lot of ways, but we also do have, like, different perspectives and different...
Yeah, we're not always going to agree and look at things the same way. It's not going to happen. And that's okay.
Yeah, and that's perfectly okay. We can be respectful and also listening to each other and listening to understand as opposed to being combative. So, yeah. And I think that's kind of a cool thing because it's another just way to grow as well. So I'm excited to see what this brings up.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, we will see you soon with our first deep dive into, am I really a descendant of a Native American Cherokee princess?
And is that even a thing?
Stay tuned. Bye.
Bye, y'all.